one thing that you learn as you're going around campaigning in different neighborhoods is that we are a small town of neighborhoods and that different neighborhoods have their own concerns. They're going through their own things, and that it's really meaningful to meet with each neighborhood to hear from them about what's directly impacting them, what they think good solutions to it would be, what would be meaningful to them. So that's something that I still plan to do.
From the Daily Catch, this is The Catch Up, and I'm Emily Sachar. On Tuesday, Debbie Hecht scored a decisive victory over her opponent, Amanda Miller, in the Democratic primary for Rhinebeck Town Supervisor, winning 76% of the vote and carrying nearly 1,000 ballots. How did she do it? Was it a message, organization, endorsements, or something else? Hecht says she and campaign manager John Rossi followed a classic ground game strategy, what she calls an analog campaign, knocking on nearly 2,000 doors among 3,100 registered Democratic voters in Rhinebeck, and focusing on direct, face-to-face conversations with voters rather than on social media. We will ask Debbie what worked, what surprised her, and what lessons she learned from 4 months on the campaign trail. It's the week of June 22nd. Debbie, welcome to The Catch Up.
Thanks, Emily. I'm happy to be here.
So let's start right in. Debbie, you ultimately won, as I said, 76% of the vote. Were you surprised by the margin, and what do you think explains it?
I was a little surprised by the margin, yes. What explains it? A few things. I have to credit my ground game above all. I think my policies and my vision, and also my disposition. I genuinely like engaging with people. And I think that when you do genuinely like engaging with people, people feel that and they become engaged. Absolutely. The endorsements were also very helpful. And I do think it was meaningful that I had endorsements from people who were also accountable to Rhinebeck voters, who live here and who are a part of our community.
As opposed to, say, some of the endorsements that your opponent got, which came from outside the community. Is that what you're
Right. Right.
Yeah. Okay. So you knocked on nearly 2,000 doors. How did you and your team organize that workload? Did you yourself do 2,000? Because I know you mentioned Eleanor Pupka was assisting. Tell us a little bit about the specifics of how that rolled out.
Okay. Well, first of all, it wasn't 2,000 doors. We canvassed 2,000 people. Because it's, often more than one person per household. And I don't know that I can give away all of my campaign secrets. It was a very small group of people doing a lot of doors. And I can only say, absolutely that I worked very hard every day. And that, John Rossi is a very dear friend of mine. And so is the whole Rossi family. And John Rossi knows what he's doing. He's no stranger to campaigning and to working to get people elected, especially women candidates. And so I was really just smart enough to know to trust his wisdom and his guidance and his plan and to trust the process. And that's exactly what I did.
So maybe we can take a step back for a second on that. How did you decide to have John Rossi be your campaign manager? What were those conversations like?
Well, in the early days, he was Lisa Call's campaign manager. So he wasn't my campaign manager. And then as I don't know all of the details, but as her campaign developed, he decided to take on a different role. And so he had more time to be with me. I've known John for years, and we've been good friends for a long time. We've knocked doors together for other Dem candidates. I was following very closely his campaign with Kara Gary, and I was very supportive of that campaign. I worked hard to knock on doors for Kara and Dan Imar Blair, both of whom were running at the same time and who were facing opponents. And so through all of that, through friendship and also through working together as Democrats, getting Democrats elected, we developed a really close bond. So when I was talking about running for supervisor, he was one of the first people I told and was very excited to be connected with me. And that's something for which I will always be grateful.
So you referenced a couple people. I just want to make sure our listeners know. You mentioned, was it Lisa Call? Is that who you said?
Lisa Call, who just won, she's running for state senate, not in our, we have Michelle Hinchy. So she is running not in our district, but he was very closely connected with that campaign in the beginning and then decided to take on a different role as time went on. She was also successful, by the way, in this primary.
And then you mentioned Kara Gary, who ran for a county judge slot in
For
the
county,
election.
yes, yes. So that was in 2025, along with Dan Imar Blair, who's our county comptroller. And so in both of these races, I went out and went door to door locally in Rhinebeck for these candidates.
So finishing up a little with the John strategy. So was it John's idea, I'm sure with you as well, but was it his idea that the ground game was going to be the essential building block of your campaign?
Yes. And I talked to Michael Dupree early on, and his advice, I think, is encapsulated in three words: doors, doors, doors. That's always the advice. So I feel that even though we have a lot of new technology, that the basic blueprint it has for campaigning has not changed. And it has to do with meeting people on their doors and having one-on-one conversations.
Awesome. So let's talk a little bit about those conversations.
Sure.
What did they teach you about Rhinebeck that you didn't know before you started campaigning? Maybe you can give us some highlights.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, it's been amazing talking to people, and I really have been collecting their stories throughout this campaign, and that's been a real joy for me. I've learned one of the things is I've learned that we have a lot of amazing people in Rhinebeck who have incredible stories. And another thing that I've learned is that the residents in Rhinebeck also kind of collectively tell the history of our town. So I met one woman who generationally has been here for 300 years. Her family has been here for 300 years. It's absolutely incredible. She knew the people, the last tenant of the Palatine house that is now being restored, the house that's right next to Warren's kitchen store. And so she was telling me stories about when she used to go to Stickles. She would ride her horse to Stickles and hitch it right outside. And this wasn't even that long ago. This is like 50 years ago, but it was a different Rhinebeck. She could just go to Stickles on horseback, do her shopping, and then, get back on her horse and go home. It's incredible. I met someone else, I think I mentioned this at the forum, who talked about what Rhinebeck was like before IBM moved here. And in the 70s, not all that long ago, and that people would get a 6-pack of beer and sit along Route 9 and see how long it took for a car to drive by. I mean, it's unimaginable today. And then other people talking about what Rhinebeck was like when it was still the violet capital of the world, and that people would lie on planks on their stomach and pick violets so that they weren't trampling on the ground. They were lying on these planks and they would pick violets that would be sent all over the world. And that because of all the greenhouses that we had, Rhinebeck was called the Crystal City, because flying above, the light on the greenhouses, the sunlight on the greenhouses would shine like crystal. And that's why Crystal Lake is called Crystal Lake. So in meeting people, you are really meeting your town in this whole other way. And so some of the stories are really, the people are also keepers of our history. And that was a really beautiful thing to learn.
Mm-hmm. Did that experience affect you in terms of thinking about how you might govern, or was it just kind of socially interesting and historically interesting?
It definitely affected me in terms of thinking about how I might govern, because, as I've said before, one thing that you learn as you're going around campaigning in different neighborhoods is that we are a small town of neighborhoods, and that different neighborhoods have their own concerns. They're going through their own things, and that it's really meaningful to meet with each neighborhood to hear from them about what's directly impacting them, what they think good solutions to it would be, what would be meaningful to them. So that's something that I still plan to do today as deputy supervisor and moving forward as supervisor, should I win in November. The best way to learn about what's going on in a specific neighborhood is to hear directly from the people who live there. So in order for me to best represent all residents, I know that I need to keep meeting with people in smaller communities to hear what's going on with them.
Mm-hmm. So Debbie, among those 2,000 that your campaign talked to, how many of those did you personally talk to, and how many were spoken to by other members of your team?
I spoke to the majority of them. I know I said that Eleanor knocked on 700 doors at my event, but I knocked on a lot of those doors with her. Often, if John was busy, I would go out with Eleanor. Eleanor did do some on her own as well. John would know the answer to that better than I do, but I would say the large majority of people had been visited by me.
Okay. I'm curious because I didn't get a visit from you because I don't live at Rhinebeck. Tell us a little about what that actually sounded like and looked like. What was your script?
Well, the first thing that we would say to people as they were coming to the door, if they didn't recognize me, as we got further along, people did start to recognize me from the Daily Catch. But in the beginning, when people would come towards the door a little confused by why there were two strangers standing there, the first thing we would say to them to put them at ease was, "We're the Democrats." And immediately they were a lot more open after hearing that. And so they would come to the door, and either I would start and introduce myself and John, or John would start and introduce himself and me. And it just, we didn't follow a script every time. We were just kind of acting in the moment and asking if the person we were talking to or the people we were talking to had any questions. And the thing that's really interesting is that often we would knock on a door and there would be a couple, and only one of them was a Democrat. Maybe the other one was a no party, what we call an independent, or even a Republican. And they were both engaged. They would both be engaged, and they both had the same kinds of questions. There wasn't a big difference in terms of how each one felt about our local government and about the things that they wanted to see in Rhinebeck. So even if only one of the people we were talking to at a given door happened to be a Democrat, it was still more of a conversation. And it was interesting to see how in line we all were in this conversation.
Yeah, yeah. So in terms of social media,
Mhm.
and you just decide we don't really need to be active on social media, and if so, why?
Well, in private life, I'm not that active on social media. I do post, I enjoy it, I'm not against it. It's just not something that I do regularly. For me, also, social media is an amazing way for me to stay in touch with faraway friends and to stay connected with them. So that's something that I also use it for. So because I'm not really an active social media user, I'm at most a moderate user. It it didn't make sense for me to be an active social media user in my public life.
Mhm.
I did eventually set up a Facebook page towards the end of I think for the last month, I set it up just getting people geared towards the fact that we were almost there, and giving people a place to ask me questions or comment or anything like that. So, I think it was a good thing to have it, but it's not something that I relied on as a strategy to get elected.
Mhm. And were you managing the social media, or was a member of your team doing that on your behalf?
I managed it myself. Every response came directly from me, and that's a good thing, because sometimes people would come on my page to be critical of me or even to bait me, And I was able to respond to them in a way that is aligned with my values, which is I responded with respect. I addressed what I could and wished the person well. So for that reason, it was important for me to be the one who was on the page.
Mhm. So it was your voice,
It was always my voice.
literally, figuratively, your voice.
Yes, yes,
I think that leads into a really interesting question. So early in the race, early-ish, mid-level maybe, criticism arose about your campaign's acceptance of a contribution that
yes,
exceeded the campaign finance limit. And
yes.
really, I guess it was about your ability to manage the office if such a pertinent detail was overlooked. And we don't need to relitigate that issue.
No, I know.
But I'm just curious, apropos of what you just said about criticism and being baited at times, what was it like for you during this campaign to be under such intense scrutiny from the public and from your opponent?
It was challenging at times. It was hard. In that sense, I felt social media was a good outlet because it allowed me to explain precisely what happened very succinctly and to even have a little fun with it. I think I posted a picture of a molehill. And I said, okay, mountains are being made out of molehills. And it was a little frustrating, although absolutely fair. I understand why it was subject to such scrutiny. At the same time, I think everybody knew that I had asked my treasurer, I was given the wrong information, and I acted on that information, which then made it my mistake. I own that completely. But as soon as I was made aware, and I was made aware by the catch, I immediately was in compliance within an hour. So this is just an issue of being in compliance with the Board of Elections law or not being in compliance with the Board of Elections law. So I was not in compliance. And then an hour later, I was. And the Board of Elections required nothing else from me. As far as they were concerned, they were very satisfied. And I think that one of the frustrating things for me was that there was the expectation that no mistakes will ever be made, either by someone who is working for me or by me myself. And it's very human to make mistakes. So, to have that be the standard, I felt lacked a certain humanity. Uh, Everyone is going to make mistakes. And so for me, the question was, how do you deal with it? How do you deal with these mistakes? I dealt with it swiftly, and I was immediately in compliance after that. And I addressed it, and that was the end of it. So that's how I handled it. I didn't get into a fight with anybody. As soon as I was made aware of the error, I corrected the error. And this is going to happen to everyone in their personal and public lives. Mistakes will be made. And so I feel like the standard should be, or the question should be, okay, once a mistake is made, how is this person going to deal with? Because that's the test of leadership, right? Not whether or not someone is ever going to make a mistake.
And that too leads into a really interesting point I'd love you to talk about. So there was a lot of incoming coming at you, like about your
Yes.
wealth, about whether you'd worked, about this and the other thing. But you didn't, it seemed to me, you didn't push that kind of a campaign back against your opponent.
Right.
So why not? Right? Why didn't you?
I didn't because it's not in line with my own values. And that's something that I had to settle very early on in this campaign, actually before running or right after jumping into it. I had to decide what my values are as a public figure. And for me, I realized that my values are not to attack someone, that my values are not to engage when I'm being attacked, to address the issues if there are real issues in that attack, but not to engage out of anger. So that is how I comported myself throughout this campaign. And it's not always easy. I mean, there has been a narrative going around that kindness is a weakness, and that's not true. You know, being upsetting, right? Upsetting someone is easy, right? Upsetting someone is not rocket science. Kids are really good at it, right? Like kids very early on master the art of upsetting someone, right? And it's also easy to, in that moment of feeling hurt or feeling angered, to respond in kind. For me, the challenge was, yes, I feel angry, but no, I'm not going to respond in kind. I'm going to make sure that I am responding in accordance with my values at all times. That showed restraint. That to me took real effort sometimes, especially when attacks made or lies told about my family impacted my daughter. That was something that was a line that was crossed that really hurt me and was upsetting to me and something that I felt was very unfair. But I didn't attack back, and not doing that and showing that restraint is strength.
Mhm.
And I hope that people see that.
Yeah. So there was, on the one hand, stuff coming at you that you chose not to respond to other than to take care of the issue, for example, the campaign contribution. There
Right.
were also opportunities when you could have pushed issues out about your.
Yes. Yes.
Or was it the same philosophy in both cases? You just decided not to go on the attack?
Yes. I think there was an article that was done towards the end of the campaign about a potential conflict of interest that my opponent would have.
Mhm.
I I felt that that was between my opponent and you and the people of Rhinebeck.
Mhm.
I didn't it didn't feel a conversation that I needed to participate in.
Like, I guess what I'm thinking of, Debbie, is opposition research. Like, your opponent was
Oh,
doing active oppo research.
yes.
You ever engage in active oppo research against your
No.
opponent?
No.
So why not?
It doesn't interest me as a campaign tactic.
Mhm. Did John suggest it at any point?
No.
Mhm. Okay. Very interesting choices made there. Yeah. All right. So when things got personal, how did
Yes.
you manage that? And I have to say, thinking about asking that question, I thought, would I ask this question of a man and only answer this question of a woman, right? But
That's
I
interesting.
think I
Yeah.
would, right? I'm.
Yeah.
How do we as humans keep ourselves calm and centered
Mhm.
when we're being critiqued? So, what were some techniques that you used?
Well, of course, I have, good friends around me that I can confide in. I can be upset with, in my personal life, I can vent, I can say how I feel. And that's always great. I always feel better after I can, unload on my friends and have these conversations. It's no secret that I'm also very, very close with my rabbi, Rabbi Jack. And so, as a friend and a guide to me in other ways, meeting with him always centered me, always made me feel right about my values and the choices I make about how I treat people. And it's hard, but he would always say to me, of course it's hard, but that's the work. That's the work. And so that work felt noble and it was personal to me. So that was also something that would lift me up and give me the energy to kind of get out there and continue to run the kind of campaign that I wanted to run, that I would be proud of.
Okay, got it. So let's talk about outgoing supervisor Elizabeth Spinzia.
Yes.
On the one hand, she really set you up for this election, right?
Mm.
But you also sought to distinguish yourself from Elizabeth and seemed to make that a really additional important point of your campaign philosophy. So just
Yes.
explain this dance to us.
Okay. So, a few things, and I do want to clear up a few misconceptions about Elizabeth in all of this. As you remember, last fall, I ran with Elizabeth and Dana Colleen Peterson. The three of us were all running for the board at the same time. We were unopposed until there was a writing campaign. But, early on, even to the point, I think it was on a day where the three of us were having our campaign photos taken for the palm card because we had one card for the three of us. So even early on, Elizabeth was saying, this is going to be my last election. I'm not going to run after this. There's some things that I want to see through and projects I want to see to conclusion, but I don't want to run after this. And at that point, as you know, I had been going to town board meetings for the better part of a year by then. And I was in love with the work. So, from where I was sitting, I was crazy about it. I found it all so interesting, so fascinating. And I thought, I want to do that. If you're not going to do it, I'll do it. So I was the one kind of jumping up and down about this. And I think for Elizabeth, it was probably a relief to know that, there was someone who was interested in running, who was already engaged with the work, who already cared about it, who liked it, who knew the board. So, she wasn't setting me up in any kind of way. It was just kismet that things happened the way that they did. She has been thinking about getting back to her life for a while, about traveling and spending more time with her family and just kind of having a life post supervisor. So there was that. Nobody forced Elizabeth into retirement. Elizabeth has been thinking about retirement for a long time. And the fact that I was willing and happily willing to consider a run for supervisor probably felt good for her to know that it was me who already cared about it and that I wanted to do it. And as for the rest, I mean, Elizabeth and I've always said we have a lot in common. She's a conservationist, she's a preservationist, just like I am. She feels very protective over Rhinebeck's rural and historic character, just like me. I've learned from her what it means to really stand up and advocate for a community. And so these are lessons from her that I will always carry with me. We just have very different dispositions and very different ways of going about the work that we're both doing. And so in that way, I did distinguish myself from her because it's true. And we both agree that it's very true. This is something that Elizabeth has admitted, and I have admitted. And I think it only became an issue because my opponent made it an issue early on that with me as a candidate, it's that I am Elizabeth, and that's not, that wasn't the case. So I had to distinguish myself in certain ways while still owning that we have important things in common in our vision of Rhinebeck.
Did you and John, Debbie, talk about the importance of making sure voters understood you are not Elizabeth? Because some people would have ridden those coattails, right, very happily. She's easily won re-election, even when she was challenged last year, easily won re-election handily. So something it seems, was decided about how to negotiate this rather maybe delicate situation.
Yes. Well, I think that, first of all, I agree with you completely that Elizabeth's coattails are pretty great, right? And I agree that the work that she's done as supervisor has been amazing. She works incredibly hard. She is devoted to the work, and she has given herself over to it 100%. I think that a part of the issue that we were all having to deal with is the fact that my opponent really led a kind of two-pronged attack. And she was campaigning both against Elizabeth and against me at the same time. At the same time, I think Elizabeth knows that, as I've said before, she's a self-proclaimed fighter. We have different ways of dealing with the public sometimes. And so to the extent that the community has been critical of her, the criticism has come maybe that she's a bit short-tempered sometimes and things like that. And I'm not. I'm different in that way. She has many virtues, that I need to aspire to. So I'm not trying to make this a negative comparison about her. She has her own style of leadership, and she's been an excellent leader. And I have my own style of leadership on the town board and as deputy supervisor. And that's different because we're different people.
Yeah. So let's talk about a few philosophical questions. Maybe these are the ones you'll listen to 5 years from now and say,
Yes,
yes, I want my daughter to hear these now.
yes.
So, what did you learn about yourself over the course of the campaign?
I learned that I am more resilient than I know. This has been, I think, a test of my resilience in a way that nothing else has been so far. So that is something that I do feel proud of, that no matter what happened the day before, I would wake up. John and I would have a conversation. I would say, eyes forward. We're not going to get distracted by what's going on to the left of us or to the right of us. Eyes forward. We have to do the work. And so being able to stay on that path and stay true to it, regardless of what was going on, that's something that I learned that I can do. And so that's something that I do take with me.
That's amazing. Give us a little tidbit. What was something that the public never saw that you might share out with us today? Something that was maybe hard about the campaign that
Yeah.
you can let your hair down a little with our listeners today and share.
Oh, sure, sure. On the sad side of things, the public did not see how the some of the lies about my family were impacting my daughter. That's not something that I showed to people. And so that was something that was really hard that we really had to talk about as a family and talk about how Ruby had to address this with her friends because Ruby does have community here in Rhinebeck. And once people start talking, the kids hear. And so that was something that we had to work on together. And that wasn't very fun.
Can you
Some of
just
the
tell
fun
us what specifically you're alluding to there?
to the thing about the finances. So it was information that's not correct information. And so my daughter had to deal with a lot of questions from her friends about stuff like that. And that's very uncomfortable and awkward. And so I think that was one hard part of this that I didn't show to the public at the time. In terms of the fun part, there was so much laughter. We really did have fun. So I said at the Catch Forum that my motto early on was, if there's no dancing in the revolution, count me out. And sometimes there was literal dancing. And a lot of times there was laughter and joy. And it was just really great. We were all working hard, so we would try to make each other laugh. And as hard as the work was, it was also really fun. John and I got into a good rhythm where we could make each other laugh. We spent a lot of time driving around in his car together, going from one neighborhood to another. And we just had a good rapport and we were happy. It was a happy campaign.
It's lovely. So, is there anything that you wish I had asked you today that I didn't ask you?
Oh, that's a really good question.
And I didn't tell you I was going to ask you the question, which makes it even a better thing.
I know. I know. I know. No, I don't think so. I think this covers a lot. Yeah. Is there anything that you didn't put on that list that you want to ask in addition?
No, I think I'm grateful that the Daily Catch was not your opponent. There were parts of this campaign where we were the opponent and
Yes.
of some voters and of some surrogates. I mean, and maybe that's one last thing I'll ask you as we close out is, did you designate surrogates to speak your voice to the Daily Catch in comments to articles on Facebook, on Instagram? Did you have a group of surrogates on your behalf?
No, I didn't. Everything that people posted on my behalf, they did on their own. In fact, when the issue of finances came out, again, false. But in any case, my response was to put something up on my page saying, buckle up. It's clearly going to be a bumpy ride from here on out if this is where we are today. Don't engage, eyes forward. We have to get out the vote, right? early voting's coming up. That's our focus. That's our goal. So I really tried to steer people away from engaging online. I don't think that anything meaningful comes from it. And I think that the more one engages in a negative and a confrontational way, it just, all it does is fan the flames. Like no one has resolved, and I think it's rare to resolve an argument on Facebook, right? Like that's just not what it works well as a tool, right? So, but again, I'm not their mother. They weren't working for me. They were just supporters and they spoke their minds. And so no one was ever speaking for me. I never sent anyone to comment on the catch. People who were close to me, if they did want to comment, they okayed it with me, but I left it up to them. And the things that I okayed always had to be things that were not attacking or not, something that would trigger further negative engagement. So it was that kind of thing, but everything was always in my voice. And I think I said, when I went to your fifth birthday party, the catch's fifth birthday party, which was so great, Tony interviewed me. And one of the things I said is, we love the catch. Sometimes we get really frustrated as public figures, but that's okay, right? Like, this is a part of what you are supposed to do. You hold us accountable, you ask us tough questions. And the reason why you do this is because this is how you inform the community. This is how they stay informed and stay engaged and connected with the issues that we're working on. So I've always felt that, you play an important role in our community. I do wish, as I've told the community as well, that they would also come additionally and hear from us, come to town board meetings, come meet with us in smaller groups, because that's another way for them to stay connected and informed. But the press is so important in all of that. And so I always wanted it to be my voice.
Great. And I do want to make clear for our listeners that the financial information that you're alluding to was not reported in the Daily Catch. We were not the vessel for that content.
You are not. Correct.
So everybody's clear. And speaking of social media, I do want to also report out today that your opponent did gracefully concede online in a message yesterday, and she did ask the community to throw their support behind you. So sometimes there can be real messages of good and healing and cohesion that can come from social media.
For sure.
I'm like you, it is not my medium.
I haven't seen that post yet, but I think that's really wonderful. So I'm thrilled to see that. I'm honored and grateful that she would post that. And that's wonderful.
Good. Well, Debbie, thanks so much for coming on the show. I hope it will be the first of many times to come. We can't wait to have you back.
Thanks, Emily. Same.
Yeah, as you move through the next phase of the campaign and presumably as you are elected. So we'll see whether the Republicans put up a candidate, but given the percentage of Democrats and independents in the town of Rhinebeck,
yes,
it's like you're our next supervisor. So we will wait that out.
Yes.
And that will conclude the catch up. So thanks again, Debbie.
Thanks, Emily, and thanks everyone for listening.
And thanks to Maddie Rosenberg, Jen Hammoud, and Esther Martell at our partner Radio Free Rhinecliff for their help in producing this episode. We'll see you next time.